Hey there, welcome back. I'll be continuing to read this guidance document from the FDA on the predetermined change control plan for artificial intelligence enabled medical devices. And we left off in section 3. It reads, this draft guidance is applicable to MLDSFs that the manufacturer intends to modify over time. This includes MLDSFs for which modifications to the ML model are implemented automatically, i.e. for which the modifications are implemented automatically by software, as well as for MLDSFs for which modifications to the ML model are implemented manually, i.e. involving steps that require human input, action, review, and/or decision-making, and therefore are not implemented automatically. This draft guidance describes an approach that would often be least burdensome and would support the ability to modify an MLDSF while continuing to provide reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness across relevant patient populations. Specifically, this draft guidance proposes recommendations on the information to be included in the PCCP in a marketing submission for a device that is or includes an MLDSF. Maybe I should remind you, MLDSF is it's like machine learning enabled device software function. All right, machine learning enabled device software function, MLDSF, just to remind you. And back. For the purposes of this guidance, the term PCCP refers to a plan that includes device modifications that would otherwise require a pre-market approval supplement, de novo submission, or a new pre-market notification. A plan that contains only minor modifications that would not require a new submission is outside the scope of this guidance. For more information on whether a modification would require a new submission, see some of these guidances. Deciding when to submit a 510K for a software change to an existing device, and deciding when to submit a 510K for a change to an existing device, or modifications to devices subject to pre-market approval, PMA, the PMA supplement decision-making process guidances. Throughout this guidance, a PCCP that has been reviewed and established through a device marketing authorization is also referred to as an authorized PCCP. See Section 4 for more information on definitions used for the purposes of this guidance. By including a PCCP in a marketing submission, manufacturers can proactively pre-specify and seek pre-market authorization for intended modifications and their method of implementation to an MLDSF without necessitating additional marketing submissions for each modification delineated and implemented in accordance with the PCCP. This is the pretty cool, useful point of this whole thing, this whole draft guidance. In other words, a PCCP as part of a marketing submission is intended to provide a means to implement modifications to an MLDSF that generally would otherwise require additional marketing submissions prior to implementation. Modifications to an MLDSF that could significantly affect or that could affect the safety or effectiveness of the device, unless these modifications are covered by a PCCP, require pre-market authorization. Pre-market authorization for an MLDSF with a PCCP may be established through the 510K pathway. See Section 515CB of the FD&C Act. PMA pathway, see Section 515CA of the FD&C Act, or the de novo pathway, see Section 513F2 of the FD&C Act. FDA considers a PCCP to be part of the technological characteristics of the device. For devices subject to 510K requirements, the determination of substantial equivalence includes, among other requirements, a comparison of the technological characteristics of the predicate device to the technological characteristics of the subject device. In making a determination of substantial equivalence where the predicate device was authorized with a PCCP, the subject device must be compared to the version of the predicate device cleared or approved prior to changes made under the PCCP. Generally, the recommendations in this guidance apply to the device constituent part of a combination product, such as a drug device or biologic device combination products, when the device constituent part is or includes an MLDSF. Early engagement with the appropriate CBER or CBER division or CDER divisions is recommended for drug device and biologic device combination products that include an MLDSF. For more information, contact the FDA review division that will have the lead review for the combination product. FDA encourages early engagement regarding a proposed PCCP with the FDA review division that will review the MLDSF. In particular, early engagement could be especially helpful for certain MLDSFs, including combination products and high-risk, life-sustaining, life-supporting, or implantable devices, which is what I work with. FDA encourages manufacturers to leverage the Q submission process for obtaining FDA feedback on a proposed PCCP for an MLDSF. This draft guidance is not intended to provide a complete description of what may be necessary to include in a marketing submission for an MLDSF. It is also not intended to delineate the types of modifications the agency could consider acceptable in a PCCP. However, some considerations on modification types are described, including examples of questions for consideration that manufacturers should address in a modification protocol. See Appendix A, and illustrations for different MLDSF scenarios where a PCCP could be employed. See Appendix B. The FDA review division with purview over the device under review will determine the acceptability of a proposed PCCP. That is, the FDA review division will determine whether the scope of the modifications is appropriate for inclusion in a PCCP and what evidence and information are required to support proposed modifications in a marketing submission. Section 4, Definitions. This section defines certain terms as they are used for the purposes of this guidance. A. Software functions. Device software functions DSF, a software function that meets the device definition in Section 201H of the FDA&C Act. As discussed in other FDA guidances, the term function is a distinct purpose of the product, which could be the intended use or a subset of the intended use of the product. Machine learning-enabled device software function, MLDSF. A device software function as defined above that implements an ML model trained with ML techniques. B. Datasets. Training data. These data are used by the MLDSF manufacturer in procedures and ML training algorithms to build an ML model, including to define model weights, connections, and components. Training the ML model happens after the exploratory phase of MLDSF development. These data typically should be representative of the proposed intended use populations, for example, with respect to race, ethnicity, disease severity, gender, age, etc. The result is an operational MLDSF. Tuning data. These data are typically used by the MLDSF manufacturer to evaluate a small number of trained MLDSFs in order to explore, for example, different architectures or hyperparameters. The tuning phase is the last phase before MLDSF testing and is often considered part of the training process. The ML community sometimes refers to the tuning data and phase with the word validation. However, we recommend the word validation not be used when referring to data or operations related to training or tuning ML models intended for medical applications, and that is because validation is a very particular term for the FDA, and so they want to avoid using that term here because it has a meaning elsewhere. Testing data. These data are used to characterize the performance of the MLDSF. The testing phase is expected to provide data to establish a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness before an MLDSF is marketed. Testing data should be independent of data used for training and tuning and should be from multiple sites different from those that were used to generate training and tuning data. Section C, Predetermined Change Control Plan, Predetermined Change Control Plan, PCCP. The documentation describing what modifications will be made to the MLDSF and how the modifications will be assessed. The modifications described in the PCCP include device changes that would otherwise require a PMA supplement, de novo submission, or new 510(k) notification. The PCCP includes a description of modifications, modification protocol, and impact assessment. Authorized Predetermined Change Control Plan, or Authorized PCCP. A PCCP that has been reviewed and established through a device marketing authorization. An authorized PCCP is a technological characteristic of the authorized device with which it was established. Modification protocol. The documentation describing the methods that will be followed when developing, validating, and implementing modifications delineated in the description of modifications section of the PCCP. The modification protocol includes the verification and validation activities, including predefined acceptance criteria for those modifications, and is intended to provide a step-by-step delineation of how the modifications proposed in the PCCP will be implemented while ensuring the device remains safe and effective. Impact assessment. The documentation of the assessment of the benefits and risks of implementing a proposed PCCP, as well as the plan for risk mitigation. It can be a separate section of a PCCP or incorporated into the modification protocol, whichever is least burdensome for a particular marketing submission. All right, Section 5. Policy for Predetermined Change Control Plan, or PCCP. Software development is an iterative process, and FDA appreciates that manufacturers of device software functions strive to continually improve and update their devices. Manufacturers should evaluate the impact of modifications to their devices and must submit a marketing submission when device modifications affect the intended use of the device or could significantly affect the safety and effectiveness of the device. And right here was they discussed the term validation. Okay, continuing, and an authorized PCCP specifies plan modifications that, if not included in a PCCP, could otherwise require a new marketing submission pursuant to 21 CFR 807.81 A3 and 21 CFR 814.39 A, and in accordance with deciding when to submit a 510(k) for a software change to an existing device and deciding when to submit a 510(k) for a change of an existing device or modifications to devices subject to pre-market approval PMA supplement decision-making process, guidances, hereafter referred to as the device modifications guidances. An authorized PCCP includes the range of FDA authorized specifications for the characteristics and performance of the plan modifications to the device as part of the detailed description of modifications section included in the PCCP, along with the associated verification and validation testing and acceptance criteria to assure the device remains safe and effective across relevant patient populations, as part of the modification protocol section included in the PCCP, and documentation of the assessment of the benefits and risks of implementing a proposed PCCP, which could be a separate impact assessment section of a PCCP or incorporated into the modification protocol. Because modifications made to an MLDSF in accordance with an authorized PCCP were reviewed and authorized through the marketing submission containing the PCCP, the modifications can be implemented to the MLDSF without triggering the need for a new marketing submission under 21 CFR 807.81 A3 and 21 CFR 814.39 A, in accordance with the device modifications guidances. Deviations from the authorized PCCP reviewed in the marketing submission could significantly affect the safety or effectiveness of the device. For example, when implementing a modification that is a deviation from the PCCP, the device's clinical functionality or performance specifications could be compromised. Deviations from the PCCP include instances where the PCCP is not followed or cannot be followed. For example, issues related to the modification protocol such as data management, retraining, or performance failure. Accordingly, modifications made to an MLDSF that are not specified in or implemented in accordance with the authorized PCCP, for example, i.e. the manufacturer deviates from the authorized PCCP when implementing the modification, likely require a new marketing submission. In such a circumstance, continued distribution of the MLDSF without submitting a new marketing submission would constitute adulteration and misbranding under sections 501(4)(1)b and 502(0) of the FD&C Act, respectively. Adulteration and misbranding are prohibited acts under Section 301 of the FD&C Act, and where appropriate, FDA may take legal or regulatory action against violations of prohibited acts, including without limitation, seizure, or injunction. Subsection A, components of a PCCP. A PCCP should consist of a detailed description of modifications, a modification protocol, and an impact assessment. See sections 6 through 8. Because these components are intended to provide FDA with the information needed for our review of the proposed modifications, the detailed description of modifications should outline the modifications that will be made to the MLDSF, and the modification protocol should describe the verification and validation activities, including predefined acceptance criteria that will support those modifications. The impact assessment helps to tie the description of modifications to the modification protocol, in that the impact assessment identifies the benefits and risks introduced by the specified planned modifications and how the verification and validation activities of the modification protocol will continue to assure the safety and effectiveness of the device. The detailed description of modifications, modification protocol, and impact assessment are all components of a PCCP and should exist in tandem. B. Establishing a PCCP. Pre-market authorization of an MLDSF with a PCCP must be established through the 510(k) pathway, de novo pathway, or PMA pathway as appropriate, as a PCCP must be reviewed and established as part of a marketing authorization for a device prior to a manufacturer implementing any modifications under that PCCP. For 510(k) submissions and making a determination of substantial equivalence where the predicate device was authorized with a PCCP, the subject device must be compared to the version of the predicate device cleared or approved prior to changes made under the PCCP. For a manufacturer who would like to establish a new PCCP for a previously authorized device with a PCCP, the marketing submission must include the appropriate marketing submission requirements and the proposed PCCP for the device. See section VE. FDA intends to focus its review on the aspects of the device that are most significantly modified. For example, if the device has been relatively unchanged since FDA's prior authorization and a new PCCP is proposed, FDA would focus its review on the proposed PCCP. An authorized PCCP is a technological characteristic of the authorized device with which it was established. If the authorized device is significantly modified other than as specified in the authorized PCCP, a new marketing submission is required for the significantly modified device. In that case, for the original authorized PCCP to apply to the significantly modified device, the PCCP will need to be reviewed and established as part of such marketing submission. FDA encourages manufacturers to leverage the Q submission process for obtaining FDA feedback on a proposed PCCP prior to submitting a marketing submission. For more information on the Q submission process, refer to the Request for Feedback and Meetings for Medical Device Submissions, the Q Submission Program Guidance. While manufacturers are encouraged to discuss their plans through a pre-submission, PCCPs are not authorized in pre-submissions. C. Identifying a PCCP in a marketing submission. The PCCP should be included as a standalone section within the marketing submission. Additionally, it should be prominently included and discussed in the cover letter and included in the marketing submission's table of contents as Predetermined Change Control Plan. The PCCP should be discussed in the marketing submission as part of the device description, labeling, and relevant sections used for determining substantial equivalence or reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. Any information pertaining to the PCCP content included outside of the PCCP section should be referenced within the PCCP section. Device labeling must comply with applicable statutes and regulations, which includes adequate directions for use. FDA may require that a change control plan include labeling required for safe and effective use of the device, such device changes pursuant to such a plan. For MLDSFs with an authorized PCCP, the labeling should explain that the device incorporates machine learning and has a PCCP so that users are aware that the device may require the user to perform software updates, and that such software updates may modify the device's performance, inputs, or use. Information on the MLDSF and its PCCP in the labeling is important in order for a user to use the device safely and for the purposes for which it is intended. In particular, this information may be necessary for a user to understand changes in the device and to continue to use the device safely and effectively across relevant populations as the device changes pursuant to the PCCP. The PCCP should be described in the 510 case summary, de novo decision summary, or PMA summary of a safety and effectiveness document, SSED, and approval order. Details of the PCCP should be included in sufficient detail in the public-facing documents to support transparency to users of FDA's determination of substantial equivalence or reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness for the device and its range of FDA-authorized specifications. Part D. Utilizing an authorized PCCP to implement device modifications. Once a PCCP has been reviewed and established through a marketing submission, the PCCP is considered part of the marketing authorization in general. In general, a PCCP should be evaluated within the existing risk management framework for the device and implemented in accordance with the manufacturer's quality system. Figure 1 depicts the process for implementing a modification to a device with an authorized PCCP. Let's see Figure 1. Here we go. Here's Figure 1. All right, we'll come back to that. Manufacturers should first consider whether the modification is or is not consistent with the authorized PCCP. A modification is considered consistent with the authorized PCCP when the modification has been specified in the description of modifications included in the PCCP and has been implemented in accordance with the modification protocol. If the modification is consistent with the authorized PCCP, a new marketing submission is not necessary. The modification can be implemented in accordance with the modification protocol, and the manufacturer should document that modification and the analysis in accordance with the manufacturer's quality system. As described previously, an authorized PCCP specifies plan modifications that, if not included in the PCCP, would otherwise require a new marketing submission pursuant to 21 CFR 807.81A3 and 21 CFR 814.39A, and in accordance with the device modifications guidances. Therefore, if the modification is not consistent with the authorized PCCP, including if the specific modification is not included in the authorized PCCP, or if the modification is included in the authorized PCCP but is not implemented in accordance with the methods and specifications described in the modification protocol, the manufacturer should then proceed to evaluate the modification in accordance with applicable laws and regulations and the device modifications guidances, if applicable, and proceed accordingly. If, after review of applicable laws and regulations, a new marketing submission is required, then the manufacturer must submit the appropriate marketing submission before the modified device is marketed. The appropriate marketing submission could request authorization for 1. A device modification effected through a change to the authorized PCCP, see section VE, or 2. A device modification not implemented through a PCCP, or 3. Both. In each of these cases, a marketing submission for the device modification must include the appropriate marketing submission requirements for the device. As noted in section BB, an authorized PCCP is a technological characteristic of its authorized device with which it was established. Therefore, for the original authorized PCCP to apply to the modified device, the manufacturer must include the proposed PCCP in the marketing submission for the device modification. The PCCP is reviewed and established as part of the review of the modified device. See Appendix B for example scenarios for implementing modification to device with an authorized PCCP. Manufacturers may contact the appropriate FDA review division, for example through a pre-submission, for a discussion about the proposed modification and whether it may be considered consistent with the current authorized PCCP. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. We'll continue on in the next video with this reading of this long guidance document. And here's the figure 1, and maybe we'll I'll start with this figure 1, and then we'll proceed with section E on the next one. All right, guys, thanks for listening, and good luck with all your research in AI and biomedical devices. Take care. Bye-bye.